Alright, ladies and gentlemen, in this video I am going to discuss further some basic care of Leachianus geckos. We're going to be talking about food and water in this one. And these are some real simple concepts. I'm going to start with water. These guys are not like leopard geckos and maybe even some types of arboreal geckos that will only drink like water droplets off the side of the cage. And you know, when I used to breed leopard geckos, I didn't even keep a water dish in there. I would just spray the cage every day and they would kind of lick it up. These guys will drink from a water dish, and so it is to your advantage to keep a sizable water dish in there. And the size of the water dish, of course, has to be proportional to the size of the gecko. This is an adult enclosure, and so I have a rather large water dish. And as always, you want to make sure that it's something that's heavy and bulky, because these guys have a lot of weight to them, a lot of mass, and they will knock stuff over very easily. So you want to have some type of heavy, solid water dish. The subject that's a little bit more complicated is feeding, and there's several schools of thought. But one thing that I want to say that is kind of universal is 3 times a week. And so on the actual, how often you feed them, 3 times a week is a good number for adults, even for juveniles. And hatchlings, you may want to go 4 times a week just because they're putting on a lot of mass, a lot of growth. So I want to talk about how you feed these guys. Now, I feed them 100% Repashy crested gecko diet. That's all I feed. Some people will feed live feeders, and there's all types of different ways of doing this. Some people say, well, you should feed them live once a week and then feed them Repashy twice a week. Some people say you should feed them roaches once a week, and then you should feed them Repashy, and then you should feed them crickets. I mean, there's all kinds of things here. I feed them 100% Repashy, and so I want to talk about how to do that. One thing you need to focus on first is the actual dish that you're using. I would not recommend going out and buying some type of little fancy dish. There's all kinds of things you can find on the internet, these little magnetic things that hang on the side with these disposable deli cups and all that. This right here is a peanut butter jar lid, and I have not found anything that works better than this. And you can throw these in your dishwasher. I've collected about 10 or 15 of them over the years. And, you know, these things are durable, they're dishwasher safe, and actually most of the time what I do is I just take it and put some water in it and let it sit for a minute, and that's enough to wash it out. But what's great about these is they're very slim. They sit very low to the ground. So when I put this in the container, you can tell that it doesn't have a lot of height to it. And that's very important, because if you have a dish that you're feeding out of that's as high as that water dish and it's not very heavy, if it gets stepped on, it's going to turn over and all your food's going to go out in your cage, and that's going to cause mold and all that kind of stuff. So I would recommend using some type of dish that's very low to the ground and very wide. This has got about a 2.5 inch diameter here, and so it's got a good width to it, but the height is really small. So that's a good dish. It's disposable if you do want to throw it away, but you know, these are washable. I wash them and reuse them. Now, another thing that I would recommend is I keep the lid of a deli cup. You can see that in the back corner there, and I actually set the water dish, or excuse me, the feeding dish on that, and that kind of keeps it more level, so that it's just some extra precaution, because when these guys get down there and they get to eating and they start stepping all over that dish, you don't get food all over your substrate, and you're not going to have mold and fungus and mess like that growing in your terrarium. If you do want to feed live, which I have done with these guys before at the end of the breeding season to kind of bulk up the females a little bit. Are you having fun over there? At the end of the breeding season, to kind of bulk the females up a little bit, you might feed them pinky mice, or you might feed them dubia roaches or something. And this is going to look like overkill. But what I have used as a feeding dish is a big glass container. Now, I don't always use one this large, but you might be wondering, why do you use your wife's nice big Pyrex cooking container to feed roaches and pinkies out of? Because it seems like overkill and it's going to tick her off. Well, the reason is because, again, these geckos are really, really large, and you need some type of feeding dish that can contain the feeder organisms. So if you put roaches or crickets or something in here, or fuzzy mice or pinky mice, they're not going to be able to crawl out. So that's one thing that's important. The second thing is when that gecko steps on this, it's not going to tip over and dump all your feeders out. The best way to feed live organisms is to have some way to contain them. This is really important when you're feeding hatchlings. A lot of hatchling rhacodactylids, especially the crested geckos, I feed them baby dubia roaches, and it's much easier for them to get in the habit of going to the same place to eat the same food every time. And if you use a feeding dish for your feeder organisms, that works out great. So I recommend something large and heavy, and glass is good because things can't typically climb glass. Dubia roaches can't. Lobster roaches could. Crickets could hop out of that, but you'd have a much better chance of containing them. The last question that people often have is, how much should I feed my gecko each time? I said 3 times a week is a good frequency. Here's what I do. I start out and I give them way more food than they could possibly eat in a particular night, and then I see how much they eat, and then I kind of start adjusting it from there. And you want to get to the point where there's about this much left after every feeding. Notice they've eaten pretty much everything, and you don't want to put any more food in there than they can consume in a single night. A lot of people, they put it in there and they just leave it in there for days. Typically they don't eat it after it's not fresh anymore, and it starts to mold, and especially gets a biofilm, which is almost a solid growth of bacteria across the top, and that's not healthy. And so I would feed them an amount to where they can eat it in a single night. Now, if you come in and this food dish is totally clean and there's absolutely nothing left in it, then you're probably not feeding them enough, and you should probably feed them a little bit more. So you just want to feed them enough to where every night when you get up the next day, there's a little bit left in that food dish.